Hi, hello and welcome to this week's iPad Calligraphy Live Demo. Sorry about the slightly later time this week. I hope it's still convenient and some of you are still able to join. I hope everyone's had a good week and doing well. We've been covering over the last couple of weeks an introduction to copperplate calligraphy on the iPad. So we're going to, continue with that for the third and final installment. So we'll be looking at the starter kit, which is available at ipadcalligraphy.com/free. And inside that, you get everything that we'll be using in today's session. So that's the basic strokes, the 8 basic strokes. So that has practice drills as well as a pressure sensitive brush for Procreate. So you can go to ipadcalligraphy.com/free to download yours. And there's instructions included for getting set up. But any of the past videos, if you've missed those, you can catch those, the replays on the Facebook page. So all the info will be there for you. And we've been covering this deep dive. So far we've done strokes 1 through to 5 of the basics. And now we're going to continue on. I'll do a quick revision of everything that we've covered, and then we'll carry on with those final 3 strokes. Okay, so I will change my camera over here so you can see my iPad, and I'll just add my little square down the bottom there. Okay, so we're looking inside the starter pack here. This is once you install it and bring it up into Procreate, you see the front cover. And here we have the layers. So if you're new to Procreate, the layers are accessed via these 2 little square icons in the top right. So we're going to tap on that to expand the layers, and then we have each of the stroke instructions, and you'll notice there's a little checkbox to the right of the layer, and this turns the layer visibility on and off. And the guide is laid out so that each instruction sheet has a practice here layer directly above it. The reason it's done this way is so that you can use the guide again and again. So you're just writing on a clear layer that's sitting above the guide rather than the guide itself, and then that way you can go ahead and write and then clear it if you wanted to redo it next time just by tapping on the layer and choosing clear. So that's allows you to continue on. So one of the strokes we looked at, this is the first stroke, it's called pressure, full pressure stroke. We'll make sure first of all that our copperplate brush is selected, so you'll see how to do that in the instruction series, how to install the brush, but this is the brush that we'll be using throughout, and it's made especially for this style of calligraphy, so it has the thick and thin strokes. If you have any questions throughout this series, feel free to type them in the comments. So don't be shy, type away. And another key thing in Procreate to know that you'll use a lot when using these guides is the 2-finger tap to undo. You can also redo your last action just by 3-finger tap on the canvas. That will just redo whatever your last action was. So that is something that you'll definitely use a lot as well. So Procreate's sort of that sort of program where you just learn as you go. It can be really overwhelming at first, especially because a lot of the actions and icons are hidden from sight at first. So gestures are used a lot in Procreate, but just stick with it. It will become less daunting over time if you just learn one bit at a time. So we'll start with this stroke here. Another little point is I usually have my brush set at 6%, and that is about the thickness that will match the version of the guide underneath. To change your brush, you just use this toggle and you'll see that it gives you the size with this fly out menu on the right, tells you what percent that brush is. So this is your size toggle. So that's what you will just make it about 6%, and that will fit the guide nicely. So just a quick review of the ones that we've already looked at. So this full pressure stroke, basically we want to set the pressure and then move into the stroke so that the width remains consistent throughout the whole stroke. And this, just so you know, the little icons in the guide, there's a start here arrow that tells you the start point of the stroke. This is telling us that it's a downstroke with heavy pressure. So the orange lines refer to this little key that you'll notice in the top right, and we have heavy pressure downstroke. So anything in orange that's indicated just means to use full pressure. And then you'll notice there's this little blue icon, and we spoke about that in the earlier videos, where this just means change to your eraser after you've made the stroke, come back and just take the top stem off the eraser just by swiping, so wiping it away. So you end up sort of coming a little bit over the line so that you can remove that edge, and that just gives it a more similar to traditional calligraphy kind of style. So so that was the downstroke. And the other thing to mention as well, using these guides correctly, is to use this first row is for tracing. So you always have this instance here that tells you the main things you need to know about that stroke. And of course there's written instructions above as well for when you're practicing on your own and you want to double check you're doing it correctly. And then the first line is tracing, and then you have these next two rows where you can practice on your own. So that just helps ingrain into your muscle memory and is a good way to really get some practice. So basic stroke number 2 is our pressure and release stroke. We looked at this as well. We're going to make sure that our practice here layer is selected so that I can write on the guide above. So the pressure and release stroke, you'll notice there's actually 2 strokes in this one. So this is just because they're very similar to each other. There's a tall and a long version. And you might recognize this stroke. This is used, in the D, the lowercase d uses a stroke very similar to this. However, it doesn't start right up there, it starts here. But this stroke is very good practice because it's used in a lot of letters. And this stroke as well, you'll notice this is like the tail of the A, and also the I, the lowercase I, also uses that stroke. So some important things to remember when we're practicing this letter is to set our pressure and keep that pressure consistent, but then start to lighten the pressure as you hit around just past the X height line. You can start to lighten the pressure gradually. You don't want a really dramatic taper from heavy to light here. You want it to sort of be gradual. So around this point, you just start to lift your pressure slightly, and then you get that nice smooth curve as you hit the baseline. And you want this upstroke here to remain thin, so the consistency of that, the width of that stroke should be consistent from the baseline to, you'll notice it ends just above, just below the X height. So a little reminder as well, if you're not familiar with the names of the guidelines, we've got our baseline here, which is the base of all the letters, and then we've got our X height line, or it's also called waistline. So this is the X height area, and it's just called that because a lowercase x would fit nicely in there. And then we've got our ascender area and our descender area. So you'll notice at the left-hand side of the guides, these are marked here. So X height, ascender, descender. And you'll get comfortable and used to those, especially if you're reading the instructions of the guide, because it does mention them quite a lot. So it's one of those things where you just pick them up the more time you spend with it. Okay, and now we'll go into the second version of this pressure and release stroke. And that's just the same here, except we're starting at the X height. And then I'll move to my eraser tool, and a note on that, just make sure your eraser doesn't have any texture to it, because otherwise you'll get like a fleckered edge, or it won't be a clean cut. You always want a monoline, or you can even use your copper plate brush for your eraser tool. And because you might not know this, but your eraser has access to all your brushes, so you can use anything that you can use as a brush. It's also available for your eraser tool as well. So you would go ahead with the tracing of that first line, and then you'd carry on your own for the second and the third lines, and that just gives you good muscle memory to continue. So another stroke we looked at was the pressure and release variation 1, which you might notice from the N and the M. This is the sort of shape we're looking at here. And as you can see, I've got some practice rows that I've already done from our session. But if you've got that and you want to clear that, you just need to tap on the practice here layer and choose clear. If you wanted to actually keep your layers, so you wanted to keep your practice row, you can also choose to add another layer on the top just by pressing this plus sign. So now I have this layer 18 here. This is a blank layer that I can continue practicing, and I can just turn off the visibility of my practice here layer underneath, and now I have a fresh layer ready to practice. So it's really versatile, the guide. You can keep your past practice. I mean, keep in mind though that Procreate has a layer limit. So sometimes you might even wish to save out your layers as you go and just keep them somewhere. So this is pressure and release. Just to give a little recap, we move in from a light pressure and then take the curve at the X height and then move down at a 55-degree angle, moving slightly past the baseline. So we then change the eraser and just knock the ending off there to give it a straight edge. So we'll do it again just down in the practice rows. And what I try and do when I do my own practice is to sort of align in the same position so that I can also use the guidelines to measure the width. So this is starting maybe 3/4 of the way into the grid. So I'm going to start mine there as well down here so that I can see that I've got my ending in about the right place. So the grid is really helpful for both this 55-degree angle that we need to keep consistent, but also just to help you kind of make sure that you're guiding your width correctly, so that it's kind of it has a dual purpose there. So you can see I'm a bit thin there, and I should make that a little bit wider. So that's about the width here, and then we move to our eraser and just take off the stem. So that was pressure and release variation 1, and then just a little recap of pressure and release variation 2. I'm going to clear my practice layer, move back to my brush tool, and pressure and release variation 2 is a great one to practice because of these pressure changes. So you'll see we start with a light pressure, and then when we get to the X height we turn and use heavy pressure, move into the light pressure at the baseline, and then bring up with a light pressure. So it's important to be consistent for both your light and heavy pressure strokes, that they're not bulging in the erratically. It should be consistently light and then consistently heavy right down until the taper starts. You'll see you start to lift off the pressure around that point, and you start to apply the pressure around that point. So this is the thickest bit of your stroke there. And you also want to make sure, again, that you're hitting that 55-degree angle so that your upstroke and your upstroke here and here are both parallel. So that was our pressure and release variation 2. Pressure and release, now we're onto the O shape, which was the stroke number 5, which is where we left off last time. We did this stroke, this was our last one. And this one, you'll see again, refer to the first stroke to give you the instructions. So we know we start at that point, and we know we're going to travel in this direction because we know an upstroke is with light pressure. Move into that heavy pressure and then into the light to close the shape. So doing that on the tracing row, start here, move from a light pressure into the heavy pressure, around, and then up again into close the shape. And you'll see I sort of messed up a bit there. This is a common thing you can mistake to make, and something to watch out for with this one is just that you overlap those light pressure lines so that they don't make any so that you can't see the close, so you're not, you can't actually see the point where it starts. So just make sure that you overlap those lines so that they join nicely and you don't have any visible overlap. So the O shape is a good one to practice because I notice a lot of people, a lot of my students actually struggle with this one a little bit in terms of getting the angle right, because you'll see it's on this 55-degree angle, as everything is in copper plate. We're always paying attention to this 55-degree angle here. And the O can sometimes kind of go a little bit like that, so it's sort of not on the right angle. So something I suggest, definitely spend some time on your O shape. And if you need to practice more tracing for this one, you might consider doing another set of tracing rows. And again, to do that, you just turn off your tracing practice layer, add a new layer by the plus in the top corner. Then you've got your new layer ready to go, and then do another set of tracing for this one particularly. And that goes for any strokes that you struggle with. The latest post on the blog, on the iPad Calligraphy blog, was talking about some tips on how you can improve. And that's one of the tips I recommend. If there's any letters, especially as you move on to the letter forms, if you find any that you're struggling with, the best way to tackle it is to break it up into the different shapes that are used. So potentially, say you had trouble with the letter A, you know, potentially part of the problem is this O shape because it's a major part of the letter A. You'll notice that you start the A like this, and then we come in and make the second part of the A is the pressure and release stroke. So this is when all this starts to come together. All these different strokes make up your lowercase letters. That's why they're so important, and I harp on about them over and over again, is because once you can get this right, you can write the lowercase letters. So, you know, it's a really important thing that your basic strokes are spot on. And that just takes practice and building your muscle memory. So that is where we left off. And now we're going to move on to basic stroke 6, which is the lead-in stroke. And that, you know, is a pretty straightforward one, although it's important to practice because we've got to be on our practice here layer, remember, because this guide layer is locked. So I'm going to move to my practice here layer. And we'll take this. This is basically an upstroke moving in to just before the X height line, finishing off. So important things to remember with this one is, well, for a start, you're kind of on a different angle than we're used to. We're very much used to so far with our basic strokes moving on this 55-degree angle, and you'll notice this stroke isn't. But if you think of it in terms of what it actually is, it's a lead-in stroke. So this actually becomes the start of the letter F. This actually becomes the start of the letter P. So if you think of it in terms of that, it can be helpful because you will think, okay, the next part of that stroke needs to, you know, go along this 55-degree angle. So it sort of gives you a little indication of what stroke is coming next and where to put it. So another thing is to keep the thinness of this stroke consistent. So you don't want a big bulge in the middle, and you don't want to be using pressure halfway through. This is a consistently light pressure stroke. So keep that in mind as well with this one. And now we're moving on to basic stroke number 7. So again, I just turn on my visibility of the next basic stroke and I make sure I'm on my practice here layer. And this is the descender loop. So this should be familiar as well. You'll notice that this is the letter J. So the J uses this, and the letter G. So the G combined with the O stroke uses that one as well. So this is a good one to practice as well. And again, we want to set our pressure. Any downstrokes that start with a heavy pressure, we want to set that heavy pressure first and move into it so that there's no change inconsistent in the thickness and the width. So you're setting your pressure and then move into it to keep that consistent right to about this point where we start to taper off into a smooth curve at the baseline. So that's the descender loop. So start with a heavy pressure, move in, lighten the pressure at the baseline, and then you kind of have this thin stroke overlap that moves up and out from the stroke. And then we want to go back, once we've made the stroke, go back with the eraser, tidy up the top of those stems. Alrighty, now our last but not least is basic stroke 8. So there's a few letters you might recognize this from as well. And something else that's coming in here is, remember our lead-in stroke? Well, this is part of this stroke as well. So that was our kind of lead-in curve that we saw before. So you come in, it's a little tricky, this one, in that you have to kind of have a good grip of your pencil, and luckily it's the last stroke, because I think if we started here it could be quite confusing, but by the time you get to this point you should be a lot more comfortable with your pencil. And I'll say now, if you're not using a screen protector, that's definitely going to make things a lot easier for you. But this stroke here, you kind of have to change your angle, so you don't want to be kind of going straight like this. It's not quite like that. It's more you're moving up, and then when you get to that X height line, you slightly angle out your stroke a little bit more. So I'll do that again. We're moving in, and then we kind of move, we take that angle a little bit further out for the loop, and then take the upstroke, take down into the downstroke, and keep that consistency in the downstroke right down to the baseline. So lead in, and then take the loop, move into that downstroke, and then we want to, of course, clean the stem when you get to the baseline. So you don't have to go like really far past that point in order to clean it, but you just want the little bevel to be past that point, so that when you tidy that stroke, you get that nice straight kind of curve edge. So the 8 basic strokes are the keys to the lowercase letter form. So you have what you need to really practice those. So don't forget to head to iPadcalligraphy.com/free for your free starter pack, which also has the calligraphy brush in it. And I have really enjoyed these sessions, and I really thank you if you've been watching and paying attention and following along. Don't forget you can watch any that you've missed on the Facebook page. So we went through each of the strokes and how to use the guide. So that basic strokes series is iPadcalligraphy.com/free. We'll give you everything you need to do what we've been doing in these demos. If you have any questions, you can always just email me or directly, Nicole@iPadcalligraphy.com. Message me on Facebook or Instagram. That is no problem. Any questions, I would love to help you out. I hope you enjoyed this series, and thank you again for joining me. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye.